good video game finale might not necessarily make or break a series, but as the last impression that you're left with, it's still pretty darn important. While some video games manage to end on the perfect note with a satisfying tying up of narrative threads and meaningful payoff in the development of their characters and plot lines, some are, well, not so great. Whether they petered out rather than concluded with a bang, left too much unresolved, or appeared to betray the motivations and goals of their central character, these game endings were kind of the worst. For now, let's commiserate on these unsatisfying endings, crappy conclusions, routine roundups, and depressing denouements, which we wish had gone a little differently. I'm Jess from WhatCulture, and here are the 9 most disappointing video game finales. Number 9, Metal Gear Solid 5: The Phantom Pain. Metal Gear Solid. If you played this one, chances are you're not surprised it's gotten a slot on this not so illustrious list, so let's just get it out of the way early. After an enormously compelling saga peppered with memorable twists, fantastic characters, incredible set pieces, and more snakes than you can shake a stick at, fans were understandably hyped for Metal Gear's epic conclusion that was The Phantom Pain. Now things don't get off to a bad start here. The story is unusual, but not alarmingly so, especially since Metal Gear aficionados are always prepared for things to get a little kooky, or a lot kooky. That isn't the problem. What is the problem is the end of the game, which reeks of the relationship breakdown between creator Hideo Kojima and publisher Konami. After culminating in an exciting face-off between Venom, Snake, and Skullface, things just sort of peter off. There's a lot of game left, but most of what you'll be doing is repeating the missions you've already done, and by the end there are more than a few plot threads hanging and nothing quite comes together. To put it bluntly, unfinished and unsatisfying are only the tip of the iceberg to the disappointment fans experienced when reaching the end of this seminal video game series. Number 8, The Darkness 2: The Darkness. Let it not be said a game has to have a bunch of entries in its series to massively disappoint fans, especially when we're talking about a series as popular as The Darkness. Now, there's nothing inherently wrong with a cliffhanger ending or an ending that leaves some plot threads dangling. It can work, but in this instance, it left a lot of fans wondering what they were fighting for through The Darkness 2 and its original, especially given their growing fondness for one of the world's unluckiest protagonists, Jackie Estacado. After having what can be described as having a really crap go of it, or to be a little more specific, enduring an assassination attempt, being possessed by a demonic force called the Darkness, watching his girlfriend get murdered, waking up in a literal hellscape, gang war shenanigans, getting hit by a train, being imprisoned in a mental institution, getting crucified, getting shot, and enduring like 100 other terrible things, we arrive at our conclusion. Here you have a choice, and spoiler alert, neither option is great. You can choose to stay in the fake asylum with a fake version of your dead girlfriend, or you can jump into hell to try and save her. Doing so will initially result in you saving her, after which she's possessed by the Angelus who opposes the Darkness, and thus leaves our hero trapped in the depths of hell with loose ends galore. Jackie screams out and everything fades to black. The end. Though there's been murmurings over the years that The Darkness 3 may come about, there's been nothing firm to suggest it will in the 11 years since the sequel. Number 7, The Third Birthday: Parasite Eve. A slightly deeper cut now, but one that features no better ending than anything else on this list, we have The Third Birthday by Hexadrive. The 2010 shooter published by Square Enix is the third game in the cult favorite Parasite Eve series, and was generally well received, topping the PSP charts in North America and gaining praise for its nuanced and unique gameplay elements, as well as its environments and score and visuals. Though many found the plot twists to be intriguing, it all gets a little too bizarre by the game's conclusion. Counter-twisted investigation agent Aya Brea is trying to stop the Eve, who intends to destroy humanity. In the threequel, she battles her way through the game's grunts and utilizes the overdrive system to manipulate time. Long convoluted story short, the game drops you into a finale that not only has logical issues and plot holes galore, it also forces your protagonist, the one you've grown attached to be shot. This happens in order to save the world because of reasons. We don't get closure on who the bad guys really are or what their motives may be. There's wildly convoluted body swapping which retcons story points and betrays your character development, and Sense has long since left the building. Number 6, Episode 5, Polarized: Life is Strange. Okay, I've gone slightly off the rails here because technically this is one game, but since it was released in episodes, I'm gonna allow it. Also, I wrote the script, so who's gonna tell me no? Life is Strange is a fantastic evolution of the adventure genre, both in the format of its storytelling through time travel, its compelling story, decision-making mechanics, and relatable characters. Unfortunately for Studio Don't Nod, all this investment into the narrative and those within it means they really had to nail the finale. In a lot of ways, the story is very satisfying. There are surprising and shocking conclusions to a lot of the game's mysteries, and the time manipulation mechanics are woven in a meaningful and interesting way. Then we hit our endgame. Though you've been making choices the entire game as to how you want to act, who you want to side with, and how you're going to deal with a bunch of different situations, you end up at a binary choice. Not just that, you're given a binary choice that not only overshadows any choices you've made so far, it can nuke your town and everyone in it off the map if you go with one option, and the other one leads to the death of the one person who spurred your journey on from the get-go. While some were a fan of this ending, and to be fair, you have to be understanding of the limitations of choice-based narratives, especially when they're trying to tell a linear story, others were more than a little disappointed that it all came down to this. Number 5, Mankind Divided, Deus Ex. Critically acclaimed sci-fi RPG series Deus Ex won plenty of fans for its compelling themes, interesting characters, and refreshing freedom of choice. The series extends over 6 games between 2000's Deus Ex and 2016's Mankind Divided. Over this time, the player grew attached to the original protagonist JC Denton and later mainstay Adam Jensen. After discovering and deliberating over a series of difficult choices related to the technological implications of AI, the social and cultural impact, and the inevitable moral quandaries, not to mention the ongoing conflict with the Illuminati, we find ourselves at the end of Mankind Divided. Despite the game itself largely impressing fans, the very end had a brief showdown before cutting to black, leaving many questions unanswered. The final encounters didn't feel particularly impactful, and many of the interesting things being set up at the end didn't have the opportunity to be realized. Being left at this point wouldn't be so bad if it wasn't very clear there was supposed to be more to come, but instead the story simply stopped. The ending was rushed out with the intention to have another game round out the narrative, but as these things go sometimes, that game never eventuated. Number 4, Desmond Story, Assassin's Creed 3. Assassin's Creed is a series with dense lore, interconnected timelines, and a conflict spanning different protagonists and historical eras. It's also a series that doesn't always stick the landing. Falling firmly into that last category is Connor's outing in Assassin's Creed 3. Though the game was generally very well received for its narrative, gameplay mechanics, and well-realized setting, things fell apart for a lot of fans by the end. In the wildly anticlimactic ending, your entire character journey between 2 compelling protagonists ends with Connor's revenge journey concluding in killing his sworn nemesis Charles Lee in a tavern, and Desmond dying in a way that can only be described as, again, because reasons. He's forced to choose between giving his life to protect the world or, well, doom the world. This opened up possibilities for where the franchise could go from this point, but for fans deeply invested in the story and Desmond's character development so far, it felt like a betrayal. The original game's ending here was to have Lucy and Desmond defeat Abstergo, but when AC2 was a hit, it was decided more games were going to be made, so they had to change that. While this is great because we got more AC games, for better and worse depending on the title, it left us with a wildly unsatisfying ending. At least when AC3 came out. There is a little more to it in the recent games, but that would push us too far into spoiler territory. Number 3, Mass Effect 3. Mass Effect. While there's very little that hasn't been said about Mass Effect 3 and its wildly disappointing color-coded endings, we'd be remiss not to include it on this list as it well and truly deserves it, so I hope you'll forgive me the rehash. An ending so controversial that BioWare had to release an extended cut version that was more satisfying. The seminal sci-fi trilogy ended not with a bang, but with a choice of your favorite primary color, or refusing a color. You could do that too. One ending would have you destroy the sentient AI big bads along with other AI life, some of whom you've become quite fond of. Another gave you control over the former, and the green option had you turn everyone into synthetic organic hybrids. That last one I found to be unusually popular with friends, but the way that everyone's eyes glow green as they're morphed into some hybrid just never sat right with me. Personally, I'm a control girly. This might not be so brutal if we hadn't spent dozens of hours building our relationship to Shepard as a protagonist and our crew, only for things to be unceremoniously petered out with little substance. While the extended cut did mend a lot of plot holes and fan concerns, a lot of the damage had already been done. At least the Citadel DLC went a ways to cheering up fans. Number 2, Dreamville Chapters: The Longest Journey. This one is a little more niche, especially if you're not into adventure games, but not to worry, it's still disappointing. Dreamville Chapters wraps up the trilogy trilogy that began with the 1999 adventure game The Longest Journey, which also happens to be my favorite game. Sorry, I will mention that every time. This sci-fi fantasy epic had built up so much lore and adoration for its characters, and continued 7 years later with Dreamville The Longest Journey. Yet 8 more years after the sequel already dropped an ending that basically left all its protagonists for dead and plot holes galore, we got Dreamville Chapters, which also has an ambiguous as hell ending. It was the kind of ending that left you with far more questions than answers, and because the narrative and characters are the primary focus here, that was especially egregious, particularly because at this point, players had waited 15 years for the full story to be told. Part of the reason is that the final game was crowdfunded, and a lofty stretch goal promised one more game, and that would provide answers to the who, what, and whys, but that game was never made. If you like ambiguous endings, you might not have so much of a problem with this one, but it did leave a lot of die-hard fans wanting. Number 1, Episode 2, Half-Life 2. I know calling Half-Life 2 Episode 2 a finale is a painful truth, but after 16 years, it might be time to accept that this is the only finale we're ever gonna get for Valve's iconic shooter series. The gorgeously realized adventure with its deeply memorable environments and characters deserved better than to be left in limbo. But unfortunately, the third episode that was supposed to wrap up the story in a satisfying way never eventuated. So episode 2 isn't the finale we wanted, but it's the one we have right now. The conclusion of Half-Life 2 Episode 2 depicts the epic battle of Gordon and Pal's hard-fought fight against the Combine. Our heroes join forces with Resistance members who include Alex's father. They meet a group of scientists working on a rocket intended to close the portal, which the Combine are trying to use to summon more of their buddies. In the end, the scientists launch the rocket and succeed in closing the portal, but quickly after this, 2 Combine advisors advance on our heroes and kill Alex's father before the robot companion dog launches in to chase them off. While this was admittedly an effective and heart-wrenching cliffhanger on which to leave things between games, especially watching Alex sobbing over her dead father, it now serves as the end of the story, at least for the foreseeable future. While 2020's Half-Life Alyx, a VR prequel set 5 years before the events of Half-Life 2, does tie up some loose ends from Half-Life 2, to the point that some people even argue it could be considered Half-Life 3, given that it heavily references events in Half-Life 2 Episode 2, it still left a lot of fans wanting. Or at least wanting a VR headset, since that's the only way to play the bloody thing. At the end, exactly where we leave Gordon, Alex, and the other characters we've grown close to over the years so far is left agonizingly up in the air. In short, as impressive and impactful as the ending is as a narrative moment, it's a brutally unsatisfying finale to leave fans with. That is the end of our list, but let me know down in that comment section which video game finale disappointed you the most. As always, I've been Jess from WhatCulture. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. As always, you can come say hi to me on my Twitter account if you like, where I'm at Jess McDonald, and make sure you stay tuned to us here for plenty more gaming goodness.